Good day, class. Hi, Brian. I'd like to begin class today by showing you this field guide right here. This is the Audubon Society Guide to Florida. This is the field guide that they use for the Florida field class here at the college. It's a real nice field guide. It starts off with nice contents, actually ocean and coastal topography, interaction of land and water, the minerals and natural resources found, our fossils, which is fascinating, some of the ancient whales, the old megalodon, shark teeth, and gets into areas, keys, beaches, sand dunes, salt marshes. So it's really a nice, talks about rivers, swamps, lakes, mangroves. So it goes through each of the habitats in Florida and gives you a summary with images. Then you get to the night sky in Florida. They actually have a guide to the night sky, what you'd see in the night sky. Different times of the year and the constellations at various locations in the state. It's a really nice field guide, actually. It's pretty complete. Then you get the flora and fauna found in Florida. Starts off with the algae. Then you have flowers, plants, trees. You know, nice images where you can see each. This would be a flower page. You actually move into invertebrates found in the ocean, insects, spiders, arthropods, so it's land and ocean, dragonflies. I use this quite a bit. Snakes, lizards, fish. It has common fish. It's not as complete. Oh, birds. I do one of my hobbies, to show you what a nerd I am. My hobby, I like to photograph birds. I used to be an underwater photographer when I was young. Health reasons put me topside. And so now I am a bird photographer. Photography's always been one of my hobbies. So, and then one of the nice things that I like about this book is in the back, it goes through the state parks and where to find them. We have in Florida, we have one of the nicest state park systems around, and it has everything from Manatee Springs down in the Keys, the parks down there. Here, look, there's us, Fort DeSoto Park. So it has a review of all the major parks and what you'd find there for naturalists. So this, to me, is a must-have book. The National Audubon Society's Field Guide to Florida. If you like to hike like I do, take beach walks, walk through the woods, photograph and ID wildlife, this is your catch-all book. It doesn't necessarily go in depth into everything, but it contains most of the organisms that you'd want to find. That was on the topic of field guides. Being next week, you have your field guide due. This week, you have the video field trip due, I do believe. Is it 11/3? It is. 11/3, the video field trip. It was brought to my attention yesterday. I got an email from a panicked student saying that the video links were down. I have made sure that they are repaired. So the video links are not down. They are up, they are running, and they are good. I'm not sure why there was technical difficulties. They seemed to disappear. They were there and then they weren't. The college updates and undergoes maintenance all the time on these computers. And I guess it knocked the links out. So I reestablished them first thing this morning and they are all working. So tonight you have your field trip report due on the hydrology of Boyd Hill. and all of the videos are up and running. Next week, we have the field guide and discussion forum that we're looking at. The discussion forum is on the dead zones in the Gulf of Mexico. And the field guide is, we went through on the shells, we went through that last class. Today, our topic is marine ecology. So having a look at marine ecology, this is a typical coral reef ecosystem. When you look at ecology, you start with an organism, an individual, and then a population, a group of the same species of that organism. The species is the fundamental unit of taxonomy. That organism with the ability to mate with other organisms in the same species. When you have a population that's members of the same species, a community is all of the different populations. An ecosystem is all of the community interacting with the abiotic environment. And finally, from your ecosystem, you would have a biome, which would be an entire area of the ecosystems. So here, this is a coral reef ecosystem. You have many different species of coral in here. I can see you have some elkhorn coral, some sea fans back here. You have a little bit of solitary coral. You have some sponges. Those would be different populations interacting as a community. And now the ecosystem would include the abiotic factors of a coral reef generally needs warm water, so temperature is an abiotic factor. It needs light, so the light is an abiotic factor. The substrate on the here we have some sand and rubble, but you need hard attachments. That is an abiotic factor. So the ecosystem is all of the communities combined with the abiotic factors that make your community up. So a coral reef is a community of all different populations interacting and the non-living or abiotic environment affecting it. All communities start off with energy. So you have to have energy to power that community. And there's two processes in which energy is extracted from the environment. The first and simplest is chemosynthesis. Chemosynthesis is the production of, and by food, we don't mean a hamburger and fries. By food, we mean a molecule that can be used for respiration. It's usually a carbohydrate of some sort. Glucose is the simplest and most commonly pointed to carbohydrate. So chemosynthesis, you're producing that glucose, that food, from inorganic molecules that are in the environment. You don't need light for chemosynthesis. So chemosynthetic organisms are what power our deep sea ecosystems. Photosynthesis, which we've heard from for most of our educational career, because you start off with plants make food. That is the process where the sun's energy is again used to supply those carbohydrates, that food. So in chemosynthesis, this is the most common chemosynthetic reaction. Hydrogen sulfide is the chemical used. Carbon dioxide and oxygen are split and rearranged into glucose. Sulfur is a waste, and then water is produced as well as a waste. Now, this glucose, that is the food, quote unquote, that powers the ecosystem. It's what organisms use for respiration, for fuel, for energy. Hydrogen sulfide is the chemical in the chemo, coupled with the inorganic source of carbon, which would be carbon dioxide. This is common in deep sea environments and intertidal areas that we have. Their telltale sign is this sulfur waste stinks, smells like rotten eggs. So during low tide, a lot of times you'll smell rotten eggs. That would be from the bacteria, which generally carry out chemosynthesis. That's their waste, that sulfur. So it's a very smelly process, to say the least. Now, by far the most common way that carbohydrates are liberated, photosynthesis. Now, this is a glorified, simple image. See the chlorophyll? Chlorophyll is a pigment. It's not the only pigment. Pigments absorb the energy in visible light. The irony here is the green chlorophyll does not use green light. It's not absorbing the green light. That's why you can see it. It's absorbing the other colors of the spectrum. But we're absorbing the light and using that energy to break up carbon dioxide, water, and then it's reassembled into that glucose. Waste is oxygen. So this glucose, again, is the target molecule. Just like in chemosynthesis, glucose is the carbohydrate. It's what powers the ecology. Here, that is the chemical formula for glucose. Glucose is one of the simple sugars. It's stored as complex carbohydrates. So as glucose is made, it's converted into starches by plants for storage. Animals also store glucose. They convert it to glycogens and fats to store energy. So glucose is that main molecule for respiration that liberates energy. It's done by, it's made by chemosynthesis. We call that chemosynthesizers or photosynthesis. Both are considered autotrophs. Autotroph literally translate to self-feeder. So you can have chemoautotrophs using the chemicals or photoautotrophs using light. The food chains then are powered by chemosynthesis or photosynthesis. This is kind of a neat image to me because here your hydrogen sulfides being released by deep sea vent, utilized by these characters. Those are Pogonophora, is their class of living organisms. They're deep sea tube worms. They don't have any digestive system or internal organs. They're 6-8 feet long worms that live in a tube that they make. And this red plume is full of chemoautotrophic bacteria. So they're the host to bacteria. These bacteria chemosynthesize, and that powers the entire ecosystem. So just like a tree in the rainforest, the worms form the base of the food chain. So deep sea vents often have a forest of 6 to 8 foot worms instead of trees. So truth can be stranger than fiction. That is an alien environment if I ever heard of one. So those are our food chains. Why do we need carbohydrates? For the energy of life which is produced by respiration. Now, some simple organisms use anaerobic respiration. Anaerobic means no oxygen, and they produce a small amount of energy. Multi-celled creatures, and most creatures, even single cell, use oxygen to metabolize glucose because it gives out a lot more energy per molecule. When you look at anaerobic respiration, you get 2 ATP. ATP is the molecule that we use for energy to store in chemical bonds. 2 ATP in anaerobic, 38 ATP in aerobic. So you get 36 more energy units per molecule with aerobic respiration. That's why we need oxygen constantly. And most complex living things use oxygen. Because the exact opposite, you metabolize your glucose, your waste is carbon dioxide, but you liberate energy. That energy is stored in ATP and used for all of our activities that we undergo, we use. So respiration is how we get energy. Interesting little side note. Respiration occurs in a cell organelle that we call the mitochondria. And muscles, because we move, muscles have a lot of mitochondria. So the difference between dark meat chicken and white meat chicken, color-wise, is the amount of mitochondria in the muscle cells. Dark meat, the legs, chickens walk and run a lot more. They're leaner because they get more exercise, but they're also darker. They're more rich in mitochondria, those muscle cells, the fibers. Whereas they don't fly that much, so there's a higher fat content in the white meat and also less mitochondria. So the difference in the color and texture has to do with mitochondria. Energy moves through the food chain. We start off mostly with sunlight, could be chemicals, and our photosynthesizers, green plants on land, intercoastals, you get some green plants. The only ones we get here are the mangroves, if you remember the mangroves, the red, black, white, those are the 3 types of mangroves. The seagrass, we get shoal, manatee, turtle, those are the 3 types of seagrass, and the salt marsh grass, which is called Spartina. The rest are algae. That's where photosynthesis occurs. Grazers eat that, and then things eat those grazers. So the respiration, the animals, even plants respire because they use energy as well to a lesser degree. Respiration is done converting those carbohydrates back. So the energy is passed on through food chains and food webs. Primary productivity is a measure of how much photosynthesis is being used. We actually measure it in how much carbon is converted. That measures the rate of photosynthesis. The average primary productivity of the ocean is 120 grams of carbon per year per cubic meter. This image is an important one. This shows you global primary productivity. Okay, low productivity in your ocean gyres. Why? Well, they're deep, so you don't get sunlight to the bottom, so vegetation's kept to a minimum. They're far away from land, so you don't get the input from nutrient runoff. So they're basically fairly barren. Here, look at, there's a big plume of life on the equator. That is the upwelling from the equatorial gyra. Remember, the trade winds blow over and that Peru current here and the current here take the turn, and it brings nutrient-rich water from the deep here and here and plumes it across the ocean. So equatorial waters have more productivity because of upwelling. But the most productive waters, look, here and here in the Arctic and down here in the Antarctic, cold water ecosystems. Nutrients dissolve better in cold water. So our cold water ecosystems, Arctic, Antarctic, are very productive. Also, areas near land are productive because of nutrient runoff, eutrophication. The highest productivity are these dead zones right there. Right before they die, they get the most nutrients. And look, the Gulf, here's your Amazon River. So we have very, very high productivity in areas where there's great fertilizer discharge. The simplest primary producers are blue-green bacteria. Here's an example of Anabina, a type of blue-green bacteria. They are single-celled. They live in filaments. So these single-cell filaments are colonies of the bacteria, colonies. So bacteria, which don't have a nucleus, remember, they're prokaryotic, are single-cell or colonial. The photosynthetic ones are called cyanobacteria or blue-green bacteria. Cyan is a blue-green color. And back in my day, we used to call them blue-green algae because they photosynthesized, they were placed in the algae taxa. We know that they're not algae because they do not have membrane-bound organelles or nuclei. They don't belong to protists like algae does. The algae belong to kingdom Protista. The most common smaller algae here is the diatom. We've also talked about dinoflagellates, coccoliths, and those are the common algae. Microalgae. The macroalgae are the large algae, which are called seaweeds. We have the red, the brown, and the green. So those are the general ocean primary producers, algae style. So you have your blue-green bacteria. Those are your photosynthetic bacteria. You have your belonging to kingdom Protista, the algae, microalgae like diatoms, and the three groups of macroalgae. Lastly, you have the marine plants, salt marsh grasses, seagrasses, and mangroves. Those form the base of the food chains. Your basic food chains start off with phytoplankton. Your phytoplankton are getting eaten by zooplankton. Remember, phytoplankton are photosynthetic plankton. Zooplankton are heterotrophic. Autotrophic would be the phyto. Heterotrophic eating. Here, these shrimp-like creatures are actually copepods, the most abundant crustaceans in the sea. And then your zooplankton feeds smaller fish and up through the line. Notice the population gets smaller as you move through the line. It's about 10% of energy is passed on. So 90% of your biomass or 90% of your food chain energy resides in these phytoplankton because only 10% of their energy is passed on from one step to the next. Food webs are really how it happens. You have all of your producers forming the bottom of that pyramid. And then as you move up, your primary producers are the least numerous. So it's kind of a pyramid shape, your food webs. And food webs just show you all of the interconnections in a particular ecosystem. This would be a Antarctic ecosystem. And you can see you're still powered by the algae, the bacteria, and the small plankton. And then you have your zooplankton. They're still sitting there on your second level, your copepods and krill. And as you move up, your biomass is getting less and less, but your organisms are getting more and more complex. Your top consumer in the ocean, believe it or not, is a orca, killer whale. They have actually been observed killing white shark. So killer whale, number one. As I mentioned, only 10% of the energy is passed along from one trophic level to the next. So this illustration just shows you how 10,000 kilograms of phytoplankton translate to 1,000 kilograms of zooplankton. 1,000 kilograms of zooplankton only translates to 100 kilograms of smaller fish, 10 kilograms of mid-sized fish, 1 kilogram of tuna. So eating low on the food chain, you have less environmental impact than eating high on the food chain. So one tuna sandwich is like eating 10,000 kilograms of biomass from a food chain. Nutrients are cycled through the food chain. If you were to take a marine ecology class, you would study these cycles in depth. This is a one-day marine ecology lesson, so we're not going to mention and learn all of these cycles, but we'll just mention the important ones. Carbon, that's our photosynthesis and respiration, the carbon dioxide to oxygen cycle. Nitrogen and phosphorus, these are the two most important limiting factors as far as nutrients go. Nitrates are used by plants to make proteins and nucleic acids. Phosphorus is used in nucleic acids. It's also used in carbohydrates. The cell membranes have phosphates in them. The rigid parts of organisms use phosphorus and silicon. So they're important micronutrients that are rare in the water. That's what's dissolved. So in nutrient-rich water, there's abundant nutrients, algal blooms. That's the limiting factor. When we have nutrient pollution, algal blooms, which leads to eutrophication and dead zones. So these are the nutrients that are talked about when we blame sugar production to the algal blooms, Okeechobee, then they release water. We have these red tides and things like the Sierra Club and all these other things are all up in arms. And they're saying that we're polluting, big sugar's polluting, or the farming industry is polluting. What's happening is the nitrates and phosphates are washing into our water supply, fueling explosive algal growth, which leads to the eutrophication. So fertilizer is a pollution when it gets into our water. It's a necessity though, when you want to feed your population, because we've outgrown natural agriculture. We have too many people. We can feed our people sustainably if we, learn to share a little better, but we do have enough food production with fertilizer and such. but without it, we would not be able to produce a substantial enough yield to feed the number of people that we have. So it's a thing that we're going to have to learn to deal with. Another limiting factor could be light. We've gone through these zones in light. That's an abiotic factor. Nutrients is an abiotic factor. Abiotic means non-living. So photosynthesis only occurs in the first couple of 100 feet. That's a limiting factor. You don't find phytoplankton at depth. So the abiotic factors that we need to consider when we look at an ecosystem are light levels. That's important for the photosynthesis. The dissolved gases, that's important for the carbon dioxide and the oxygen. You have to have dissolved gases. The temperature, the acidity of that water. Remember, we are starting to have a problem with the acidification of the ocean. All the fossil fuels and the carbon dioxide forms a weak carbonic acid, drains into the ocean. That throws off the calcium cycle because calcium carbonate is a neutralizer of acid. So the more acid you put in, the less calcium carbonate there is. The less calcium carbonate there is, the harder it is for organisms to make shells. These shelled organisms form the base of our food chain. These foraminifera and a lot of our phytoplankton have calcium in their tests and frustrals. Silica is another hard part that these organisms use. So we're disrupting these cycles. The salinity is an abiotic factor. The pressure, some organisms thrive under pressure, others dissolve. Dissolved nutrients, that's the nitrates and phosphates mainly. The depth, the tides, substrate, the ground. A hard substrate is mandatory for coral reefs, for algae to fasten itself to. A muddy substrate is mandatory for seagrasses, mandatory for mangroves. So many times the substrate determines what lives there as well. So those abiotic factors are the non-living limiting things that determine what lives there. Now the biotic factors are living relationships. Food is the most number one thing that pops out to you. The crowding, spatial factors, wastes, defensive territory, they're all examples of biotic factors. The fact that organisms live together, we call that symbiosis. Symbiosis is living together. The different types of symbiosis, predator-prey. Predator-prey really helps both populations, although one population is having part of its species being eaten, and that's not necessarily good for the individual, but you do weed out the sick, you weed out the old. A predator allows for different prey species to occupy a same niche by eating a variety of foods. It keeps the populations in balance. So you reduce competition, both intra and inter species competitions, allowing for a variety of organisms and ensuring that the sick and the old are weeded from the population, giving you a stable, healthy population. So predator-prey on the surface is negative to the prey, but in the grand scheme of things is positive for the prey species in general. Commensalism, one is benefited and the other is unaffected. Mutualism, they both receive a bonus. And then parasitism, the host is harmed in some way, where you may have a host in commensalism, but the host is unaffected. So our predator-prey, the species look, when the prey species is high, the predator would be low, but then the predator would take advantage of that and rise. But now the prey species would drop because there's more predators. So they're intimately tied, but they're not in phase. When predation is high, population declines. When population is low, predation declines, and then the population rebounds. So they're tied together, but they're out of phase as far as pure numbers go. Commensalism, here's an example. This scallop, this calico scallop, has two barnacles living on its shell. Well, I mean, that doesn't really affect the scallop any way, shape, or form. So the host, in this case, the scallop, is unaffected, and the barnacle has a home. It can't live unless it has a hard surface to attach to. So there's marine commensalism taking place. Mutualism, both benefit. In the case of Nemo and the anemone, the anemone gets free food from Nemo's excrement and any predator that may want to eat old Nemo. And our clownfish gets the benefit of having a home with nematocysts, the stinging cells of cnidarias, cnidocytes, protecting it. Both benefit. And of course, these, which are sea lice, which is a type of copepod, are draining the fluid of this poor fish. So the sea lice are the parasite and the fish is harmed. That's the host. So those are the types of symbiosis that we find in nature. Thermoregulation is important. As a kid, we learned warm blood, cold blood, which is not accurate because a cold-blooded creature in 102-degree temperature is now warm-blooded. So we have thermoconformers or poikilotherms. Their body changes with the environment. We have thermoregulators, which we used to call warm-blooded, but we call homeotherms. They require constant body temperature. So they regulate their own temperature with metabolism. Here's a one that does both in a way. Our friend, the white shark. This is a St. Pete white shark. I've seen white shark reports as close to about 8 miles off the beaches here. They're relatively rare in the Gulf. We don't have a large food source for them in the Gulf. We have some tuna and some dolphin, but really they don't thrive in the warmer water. They're present because there's some food for them, but they're rare. The white sharks thrive in the cold water where there's an abundance of seals and sea lion. But anyway, this guy was caught by a fisherman in St. Pete, out of St. Pete, commercial fishermen. They constantly have to swim, so it's not urban legend, it's real live. Not all sharks do, but some of the large predatory sharks, and some do. They don't have muscles over their gills, so there's no way to pump water across the gills. Just like you always have to breathe, you have to have air flowing into and out of your lungs. Fish always have to have water flowing over their gills to pull oxygen out. Most have muscles and they just go. If you saw the picture, like fan their gills open and closed, and it comes in through their mouth, over the gills, and out through their gills. But the sharks, and this group of sharks, don't have those muscles, so they have to swim with their mouth open all the time. And the water goes in their mouth, through their gills. So they're breathing by swimming. That produces a lot of heat, and they use that heat to warm their body to give them a predatory advantage, because now their temperature is warmer than the environment, they have more energy, and they're better hunters because of it. You wonder if these guys sleep, dolphins and sharks and stuff like that, and they sleep half brain at a time. Believe it or not, they sleep one hemisphere at a time. So they do sleep from time to time, just half their brain sleeps, so their other half automatically makes them swim or surface to breathe in the case of dolphins. Osmoregulation is the balance of salt. Some can form, which means their salinity just changes with the ocean. As a matter of fact, starfish and other echinoderms use seawater as blood. They don't even have their own blood. They just pump seawater directly into their body. Osmoregulators regulate their salt balance. Urination, special salt glands do the trick there. For instance, the most famous are the salmon. When the salmon enter fresh water, they have to conserve salt, so they stop urinating. And while in salt water, they have to get rid of salt, so they concentrate their urine and have special glands that remove salt for them. Another important aspect is feeding. And the different modes of feeding are filter feeding. Sponges and other organisms strain the seawater for food. It's a little different from what whales do. Whales bulk feed. They actively look for schools of organisms and then swallow whatever they can get. So they're not just filtering the water, they're doing a little bit of hunting as well. Fluid feeding's parasitic. Deposit feeding's kind of gross. Our friends, the sea cucumbers and a lot of the worms, eat the seafloor and digest out whatever's there, whatever organic matter is present. And phagocytosis is cellular feeding. Organisms migrate, and some of their migration is round trips between regions. Some is moving up and down the water column in response to light. The largest mass migration in the world, as far as number goes, are zooplankton rising up at night to feed on phytoplankton and then moving away from light in the morning down to the dark zone to avoid predation. So they move up and down the water column every night. That's called phototaxis, the movement in response to light. So salmon, they are living in, the ocean as adults, but then they move into freshwater to breed. Other organisms like the eel live in freshwater as adults, but move into saltwater to breed. Sea turtles migrate back to their natal beaches after they grow up in the Sargasso Sea or the other ocean gyres, as we discussed last time. The gray whales migrate up and down the coast of the North America. Their feeding grounds are up here in the nutrient-rich waters of the Bering Straits. And their breeding grounds are down here in the nutrient-poor waters, but the warm protected areas of Baja. So they migrate up and down the coast. The pregnant females move down, they give birth, they nurse their calves, and then they return up to live and feed. That is a large whale migration. Of course, phototaxis is the movement up and down the water column. Here, one of the copepods is the main phototaxis organism. Succession is the change of an ecosystem over time. The climax community is its stable ecosystem, what it ends up as. If an ecosystem is damaged, it has to recover. That recovery is called secondary succession. So primary succession occurs with the ecosystem establishing. Secondary succession occurs with recovery if it's damaged, but you wind up with a climax community. The various climax communities we have, and next week we're going to go through all of these climax communities in our Ecology of the Oceans, the Ecosystems of the Oceans lecture. Next week we have a tour of coral reefs or rocky intertidal zones, the different seaweed communities, our kelp forests and such. We've already talked about the beaches, so we're not going to hit the beaches as hard as that, but we are going to look at our salt marshes, our estuaries. We're going to go down to the ocean deep and view these locations. So next week, we are going to tour the ocean and look at all of the different ecosystems and the structure of the ecosystems. So it's going to be a two-class lesson on the ecosystems of the sea. Any questions regarding today's lesson? Excellent. I'd like you to take the rest of this class and today, as a matter of fact, to finish up your Boyd Hill hydrology report. Again, the videos have been relinked, that repair has been made, so we're good to go. And everybody have a great day. I will see you next week. Any questions? I'll be here waiting and answer them as you guys log off. Have a great day, all.
Thanks,
Hey,
Henry.
Professor. Oh, sorry. The assignment that's due tonight. Do we just answer the questions and put in all the things on that box, on the scale box?
No, you have to write the report. You have to answer all the questions, do that, get a cover. You're submitting a lab report. All the instructions are there.
Okay.
Class that we went through, all the instructions detailed on how to read it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Hi, Professor. I just want to
Yes.
say, I actually I volunteer for Audubon sometimes.
Right.
I do some bird stewarding out on the Port DeSoto and Snappy Beach. So I actually have
That's
one of
cool.
like the bird books, but I just wanted to ask again, what was the name of that book that you showed at the beginning of class?
It's the Audubon Society Field Guide to Florida.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, it's a great book.
I might pick that up. Thank you.
You're welcome. Have a great day.
Actually, sorry, one bonus question. Do
No
you know
problem.
like
I take
any
a bonus anytime I can get it.
do you know any like salt marshes around here that I like could visit and check out?
Well, all along the coast of Fort DeSoto, when you go to the Arrowhead, there's flats and salt marshes that you can walk around and look at. But at our latitude, we don't get as much salt marsh as we do mangroves. If you go north an hour to 2 hours, the salt marsh fields are miles upon miles long. So we're just at that transition where our salt marsh is dominated by mangroves. So anywhere you go, you can find areas with that grass sticking up, but they're small and patchy. Let's say you go to Jacksonville, you can go for miles and have extensive salt marsh meadows.
Okay, thank you. I'll
What I
check
would
it out.
recommend is go to Fort DeSoto, go to the Arrowhead, and get in the water and walk the flats, and you'll see areas of salt marsh grass.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you.
Yep. Have a great day.
I got one question, Doctor.
Yes, sir.
That slide number, phototaxis number 34. Is that similar to the deep scattering layer, where some populations go to the top at night and they go to the bottom in the daytime to protect themselves. Is that the same as phototaxis?
That is phototaxis, yes, sir.
That was on chapter 12. Okay, thank you.
No problem. You have a great day.